Welcome to the BeWell program. My name is Dr. Ted Bender. I'm a clinical psychologist and the CEO of the BeWell Network. You can always learn more about me at BeWellNetwork.com. Our number is 877-769-8977. My goal in this program is to educate people and to help many people understand that they are not alone. There is help for the many life obstacles we endure. Today I have the author of the book Pretty Sick, Tim Durning. He's a renowned chef, entrepreneur, author, and an International Federation of Bodybuilding pro. He has led a fascinating and tumultuous life, and the recent release of his book, Pretty Sick, documents a big part of his journey, including significant heartbreak along the way. Tim, welcome to the show, and thank you for being on.
It's great to see you again, Dr. Bender.
Absolutely. Tim and I have known each other for quite a while, and I have lived and been there with you through a lot of this journey. But you're the one who's gone through it. You're the one who's lived through it. And your book was fascinating. I started reading it, and as always with these types of shows and my research, I plan on reading it over a period of a week or two. Not only did I read it in one sitting, but my wife read it the next day in one sitting. We just couldn't put it down. It was so well written and so deep and so raw and terrifying and honest. And I just really wanted to thank you for sharing that, because I know it wasn't easy, but it was also probably pretty cathartic for you, I would imagine.
Originally, it started off as you know, solely as a catharsis, just trying to get it out of my head, so to speak. It was a very dark time. When I began writing in earnest, it took some dark turns again, which was a surprise to me. When you have to read, it's one thing to write it down and get rid of it. It's another thing to write it down and continually go over it and over it and over and read it over again. The trauma comes back. PTSD is a real thing.
Absolutely. You know, Tim, I was thinking back in preparing for this interview, I was thinking back to many, many years ago when we both were Ramada employees at the Ramada Inn in Tallahassee, Florida. And at that time, I had just graduated my undergrad, so I had a degree in psychology, which really didn't mean much at that point. And I was looking for work, and luckily you took me on as the restaurant manager, and Tim was in charge of the kitchen manager and director. And I remember learning about you, and you were telling me how you sponsored people, and you struggled with alcohol. And there was a question I asked you, and I think you might remember. I said, Tim, you know, what if you're at like a picnic or a day event and there's a cooler full of ice cold Heinekens just sitting there? How do you not just go over and have one? I'll never forget your answer, because I've told this story to so many patients in the last 12 years. And your answer was simple. You said, because Ted, I won't just stop with the one. I'll drink every beer in the cooler and to a point where I vomit. Then I'll continue to drink, and then I'll go to the liquor store to buy a bottle. And I was like, oh, at that point. But you know, that story really, I think, is still one of the part of the central foundation of my understanding of the disease of addiction. That really helped me to understand the why and why you couldn't have just one. Do you remember talking about that?
I do remember that. It's challenging, because most people, it's difficult if you're not an addict to understand what it's like to be an addict. People throw out that, well, it's a choice. And I'll defer to that. In some cases, it becomes a choice. But, I went through a lot in my addiction, as you know. I touch on it in my book, sexual assault. That's incredibly painful. It's very difficult to talk about, obviously because of you and because I had the repressed memory starting to come back about it. I ended up having to deal with it much more than I actually would have wanted to. I was fine. I think I told you that before. I was fine, just leaving that right where it was.
Right.
I didn't need that to come back and me have to go touch on it. But when people say it's a choice, it's like, I didn't choose that.
Yeah.
That's where addiction led me, Those aren't choices you make. Yes, I want to go out and get attacked, It's a little cut and dry when people throw that out there.
You mentioned PTSD, and you mentioned the history of sexual assault. And I know, again, from knowing you, how hard it is to even bring that up, not only in your own mind, but especially speaking about it out loud. And you mentioned, being fine with kind of leaving it where it is. Do you still feel that way now that you have really kind of brought it out and addressed it?
I don't think you can leave it. I think you're the one who told me. We had this discussion. No, I didn't want to have to deal with it. I was fine with it. I had buried it away.
Yeah.
And I never talked about it. I didn't tell anybody about it. I just kept it hidden. And then, I went through my own dark times there, right? After the book came out with the pandemic and everything.
Yeah.
I went through a fire. I mean, all there's a lot of traumatic events that happened. And that just started coming back to me. I would see it in my dreams. I'd wake up in the bed screaming, looking at the corner of the room, thinking that somebody was there. And the someone was me watching.
Yeah.
And I had to convince myself, there's no way, that can't be you. But in my mind, I had literally separated myself out.
A lot of people that have suffered through severe traumas, as you have, and not just one, it's happened to you again and again, feel the same way, that you can just bury it, you can put it away and not think about it. But as you've learned over really the course of decades, is that it doesn't just stay buried. It comes out in ways, sometimes in waves, at times you would least expect it, or times of high stress, or memories, or dreams, or nightmares, and it does continue to affect the quality of our lives as we grow older.
Yeah, it becomes impossible to not deal with it after a while. Like I said, when I buried it away, I wrote, I still write poetry. I try not to tell too many people that because it kind of goes away from my IFBB pro status.
Hey, you could be a bodybuilder and a poet at the same time.
But part of that, the reason I took on this facade was to scare everyone away from me because of what had happened.
That was actually my next question. So do you think that your history and past trauma is what led you into bodybuilding? Was that a direct result?
100%.
So talk about that evolution a little bit.
I remember being, I wasn't, even though I was in karate and there's a lot of things that go into this. I never felt safe after that happened.
Yeah.
I always felt weaker. You couldn't, if I got in fights, the way that I handled them was just ugly and horrific because I couldn't have anyone else touch me. It was a challenge, and it became an MO for me. So then I'm also this, I'm a pretty sensitive gentleman. And so when I would have contention, I would act out. People would call it being a temperamental chef, as you know. I used to throw things, right? That was me acting out of my addiction and of my post-traumatic stress. That's where all of that came from. And I didn't really figure that out till later on. And people were like, remember this, remember that?
Yeah.
All violent events. Not that I didn't take it out on people directly, as you know. I threw pans. It was a display.
Yeah.
Just to keep people away from me because I couldn't handle that. The contention was not.
I remember you described to me at one point, the bodybuilding was almost like building armor, like literally.
And no matter how many times you tell me the war's over, I can't take it off.
Exactly. So tell us a little bit about your book. So the book surrounds a relationship. And again, since I've known you so long, Tim, I think this is something that's interesting to point out. And I'll let you kind of talk about her and everything that happened with that. From an outsider's perspective, especially me, not living in Tallahassee anymore, and we've kept in touch, we've been keeping in touch for years beyond when I left Tallahassee. But from an outside perspective, just to be completely honest, as your friend, my thoughts always were, why in the world is he with this girl? That's what I always thought, as your friend, you know what I mean? But after reading your book, it was much more clear to me. It didn't make sense to me from an outside perspective. Then I read the book and I was kind of like, oh, I got it. I understand now. So tell us a little bit about that journey, that relationship, how you decided to write the book and kind of what happened.
Well, I was clean when I met Jess, and I met her in, under less than perfect circumstances, as you know.
Yeah.
And that was, again, me acting out. That's another thing people tend to forget about addiction is that we blame the drug.
Right.
Addiction is addiction. And addiction is a mental disorder that we have, a disease, if you will, that affects every area of our life. So even if we're not using drugs, if we aren't doing anything to improve, to get better, then we're still using.
Yeah.
In this case, I wasn't using, as you know, I was using women.
Yeah.
Instead of a drug. That was my drug at that time. Jess and I met. We were, she was in active addiction. I was clean at the time. And as you know, I tend to have a white knight complex, if you will.
Yep.
Pick up a baby bird and help. And Jess and I just, in this warped way, fell in love. She was fraught with mental illness, bipolar disorder, we know.
Yeah.
Could have been a borderline personality as well. Some of these things, it doesn't really even matter at this point, but I just wanted to help. I saw something well beyond what other people saw. They saw the manifestation of a disease. And finally, at some point, it took me a while to do this because at first I was just too self-centered, to see beyond that and to see Jessica and fall in love with her. She was crazy. She was all over the place. She was a badass. She fought. She was, and it was exciting. One of the problems with that, and what I did learn, I think I mentioned it in my book, is that mental illness is contagious. Especially sexually transmitted. In this case, when you see that violence, when you see that for the first time, you're completely thrown off. You're like, oh my God, you're repelled by it. Then each succeeding time, it becomes normalized. You become desensitized to it. And then eventually, it's just Tuesday. It happens all the time.
Right.
Everyone else looks at it and goes, well, are you crazy? It's like, yes, I am.
And you mentioned, the bipolar disorder and the substance use disorders as well. And for our listeners, I think what Tim is describing is like when you mention it being contagious, you just kind of become habituated to it, or it becomes the normal. All right, though, like you said, it's just Tuesday. And I got that also, from knowing you and from reading your book, that kind of white knight persona that that you've told me about in the past, and that kind of came through there. And you saw someone who was injured and needed help and needed support, and you tried to save her.
Yeah. You can't save anyone. I've learned that. People have to save themselves. You can set them up. You can do a lot of things, but ultimately, they have to be able to fly on their own. As you said, when people have to hit a bottom.
Yeah.
And until they hit that bottom, they're not going to be willing to do anything else.
So
it is hard to watch. It's so hard to watch.
Take us through the rest of that journey, Tim. I know how hard this is for you to talk about, and I'm so grateful to you for being on today. And I don't know, maybe talking about this publicly for the first time. Take us through the rest of that journey. Well,
I don't want to give all of the points of the book. But eventually, Jess and I were off and on, as you know. She went to jail at one point and had to detox in jail.
Yeah.
Alcoholism, shaking like a leaf. You wouldn't have believed it. She was pallid, just pouring sweat. She could barely talk. Her voice was incredibly shaky. I went and saw her that first day, and I saw her detoxing so hard. And each day after that, she was getting a little bit better, a little bit better. And then I started to actually really meet her for the first time. This person that I had only seen glimpses of, in between rages and all the other things that were going on, wars. And that's when I really started to see this incredible potential. And it ruined me for a lot of things because I couldn't look past these people anymore, these women in this case. I always thought of it as a victimless crime. I get what I want, they get what they want, no harm, no foul. When you see the humanity in someone for the first time, you can't look past them anymore. You see a daughter, you see a mother. In her case, Jessica had 3 children. You see a sister, you have to deal with it now. You don't just get to look past them anymore.
And in my line of work, I've got to see that a lot of times, that what you're talking about, that metamorphosis where a patient comes in on their absolute worst day, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days later, not only are they a new person, but they're unrecognizable. I can tell you how many times I've met a patient day 1, day 2, then for various reasons, I see them 30 days into their treatment, and I come back to check in on people, and I don't even recognize them anymore because they just look so different, I was like, wait a minute, that's you? I can't believe that. I can't believe it. You look so amazing now. And they're talking different, and their personality is different. And like you said, getting through that detox process, you start to see glimpses, but that's when the real work begins.
Yeah, she wouldn't. Once she got out of jail, we had talked about her moving in with my ex-wife.
Yeah.
Actually, which probably been a horrible idea, but
Yeah.
we discussed it for a while, and I was supposed to pick her up at the jail when she got out.
Yeah.
She had someone else pick her up. Next time I found her, she was drunk.
Yeah.
And went straight back to what she was doing.
Yeah.
I felt so betrayed. It was, it wasn't. I mean, we do what we do. You can't take that personally. And those are some of the other things. And those are some of the things that I learned that I probably didn't need to, An addict's going to do whatever they have to do to get their drug. Mm-hmm. Simply the way that it is. If you're not willing to pay for that, someone is.
Tim, when I describe you a lot to friends and people who don't know you, I always talk about how amazed I've always been with you. You and I have remained close friends for a long time. You helped me through a very difficult time in my life, and I'll always be grateful to you for that. I've always been really enamored with your entrepreneurial spirit and your fearlessness in that domain. You still have made the best cheeseburger I've ever tasted in my life, and my wife backs me on that. And we still remember that it was called literally the best burger in town, if you remember.
Yeah.
And I'm convinced that will never be recreated. It's impossible to recreate it exactly.
I think I can still do that.
But you started your own restaurant, you started your own food delivery company for people who were training, and now you've created this really unique and amazing gym in Tallahassee, Florida, my hometown in Tallahassee, Florida, called Steel Yard. Tell us a little bit about your evolution into becoming a gym owner and how you have used your history through addiction and sobriety to kind of come to the place that you're at now.
A lot of people who train out there who don't train because they just want to look better, because they're in competition. Even when I started, I didn't start training to compete. I started to get away from the ghosts and the demons. Mm-hmm. I had to have a place that I could go. Most regular gyms don't want our kind, if you will. I hate to say it that way, but I don't know how to say it. We yell and we scream and we go in there and that's where we run away. That's where we get away from those demons, and that was the evolution of Steel Yard. There was a gym that I trained at the pandemic called Powerhouse. Now Powerhouse went out of business. It became no Powerhouse because there was no electricity. But we continued to train. People would come in 98, 100-degree weather and train in that gym, and they didn't care.
Interesting.
So that was the base for us. I met my business partner and girlfriend, Lori, and we started. She saw what I was doing and believed in it, mm-hmm. That's a synergistic move that's just unstoppable. And we moved forward. We moved forward before we were even ready. We moved on a property. We weren't ready for the property. We sat in there, had panic attacks, going, how are we going to do 4,000 square feet? Where are you getting the equipment? Yeah. It's a universal thing. For lack of a better word, it's a God thing. It's just the way this came about. So now we're trying to help these. We got all the kids from colleges, right? Yeah. And I watch them all the time. You going out? I know what you're doing tonight. Y'all be careful out there. Because we have to pass on what we've learned at some point, and that includes rape. These are the things that we have to be able to talk about. I hate that word. We have to be willing to share those. We have to be willing to say those to people so that they know that they're not the only ones out there who had that happen. Exactly.
And you've really taken that and ran with it and really got the courage to face the past traumas, especially the most difficult one for you. And I know that's an ongoing process. You're still doing it. You're still going through it. And you have once again kind of found a way to give back. And, you and I used to always talk about it, the gym was our therapy, right? Yeah. Success in iron.
Therapy, that's it.
Yeah. And we used to talk about that a lot. And I know that has been something that's been extremely helpful to you. So the book is pretty sick. You can find it on Amazon.com and anywhere else books are sold. It is a fantastic book. I promise you, once you start reading it, you won't be able to put it down, and pick up a copy of it to see what happened. It was a tragic story, deeply memorable story, raw, emotional, in your face, extremely well written. I've been so impressed with your writing, Tim, and it's a skill I didn't know you had until a few years ago. And really, it's really been amazing.
Necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you again, Tim, for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time. I appreciate all of your listeners and followers as well.
I'm Dr. Bender of the BeWell Network. Our show, as always, was created to help people. For more information, visit BeWellNetwork.com. You can also learn more about Steelyard and Tim at SteelyardGym.com. Until next time, be well.